I came home from my deployment expecting peace, not problems. But the moment I set foot back in town, I learned something that left me stunned. My own land, the property that had been in my family for years, had been sold right out from under me by the HOA. Imagine the shock of finding out that while you're serving your country overseas, the very community you trusted took advantage of your absence. It wasn't just about the land. It was about betrayal, disrespect, and the idea that some people thought they could push me aside without consequences. At first, I couldn't believe it. The papers, the signatures, the so-called auction, all done while I was thousands of miles away. The HOA figured I wouldn't fight back, that I'd be too busy rebuilding my life after serving. But what they didn't count on was the fact that I had resources, proof, and more support than they could ever imagine. My land wasn't just a piece of property. It was a part of my history, my future, and a promise I wasn't going to let anyone break. I had two choices: roll over and let the HOA take everything, or stand my ground and fight back the right way. And let's just say, when I made my decision, I didn't come back alone. The same discipline and strength I had relied on during deployment came with me, and I wasn't afraid to use it. What happened next turned their entire subdivision upside down, and the people who thought they were in control quickly realized they had picked the wrong person to mess with. But here's where the story takes an even sharper turn, because when I moved to take back what was mine, the HOA never saw who was standing behind me. When I first bought that land, it wasn't just about owning property. It was where I planned to build my home once I returned, a quiet space away from the noise of everything I had already lived through. My neighbors knew that too. The HOA had been eyeing my lot for years, whispering about turning it into a community space or flipping it to make more money for their projects. But every time they hinted at it, I stood firm. That land wasn't for sale. What they couldn't get face-to-face, they decided to take while I was gone. During deployment, communication is limited. I had letters from home, updates here and there, but never once did I get notified about any sale, meeting, or hearing. By the time I got back, the paperwork was neat and polished, as if they had been planning this for months. They assumed the uniform I wore meant I was too distracted to notice or too tired to fight when I returned. What they didn't realize was that their arrogance left a trail of mistakes I knew exactly how to uncover. People started telling me bits and pieces. A neighbor admitted the HOA president bragged about how easy it was to sell off my lot. Another mentioned how they rushed the signatures, never expecting me to question it. The more I listened, the clearer it became that this wasn't just bad luck. It was deliberate. They had underestimated not just me, but the bond one shared with the land itself. I started gathering everything: records, witness statements, even old photos that proved my claim. But the real turning point wasn't the paperwork. It was who I turned to for help. And when I showed up with them by my side, the HOA's confidence began to crack. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just about me. It was about control. The HOA had been running the subdivision like their personal kingdom. Fees were rising, rules kept changing, and anyone who spoke out was silenced with threats of fines or legal notices. My land had become their biggest prize, and selling it behind my back was supposed to send a message to everyone else. They were untouchable. But now that I was back, their so-called authority was about to be tested in ways they never imagined. Some neighbors quietly supported me, slipping me copies of letters and emails the board had sent around. They were scared to speak up publicly, but they wanted me to know I wasn't alone. Others, though, sided with the HOA, believing their promises of progress and development. For them, my fight was an inconvenience, something that might hold up the new playground or walking trail the board had promised. That divide in the neighborhood only fueled the tension, turning once friendly streets into cold stares and whispered conversations. Meanwhile, I wasn't just working on paperwork. I reached out to people I had served with, people who understood loyalty and integrity. They didn't come in uniform, but they stood by me as brothers and sisters who knew what it meant to protect what's right. Their presence alone made the HOA uneasy. They were used to homeowners bowing down to their demands, not standing shoulder to shoulder with a group of people trained never to back down. Still, the board pushed forward, acting as if nothing could stop them. They scheduled meetings without notifying me, tried to erase records, and even hinted that I was making trouble where none existed. But every move they made only revealed more of their scheme. And as I got closer to the truth, I knew the clash between us was only just beginning. The day came when the HOA finally pushed things too far. They announced a new development plan that included my land front and center, showing glossy maps and blueprints like everything was already settled. They acted as if my property was just another square on their chart, erased from my life and folded neatly into their project. Sitting in that crowded meeting hall, listening to them boast, I felt the pressure in the room shift. Neighbors looked back and forth between me and the board, waiting to see what would happen next. I stood up, and the room went silent. For the first time, I spoke openly about what they had done, how they sold my land while I was deployed, how they ignored every law of fairness, and how they thought I wouldn't have the strength to fight. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Some faces turned pale, others avoided my eyes completely. But the board members? They doubled down, smirking, acting like my words meant nothing against their signatures and stamped papers. Behind me, the support I had built wasn't just moral, it was physical. The people who stood by my side weren't intimidated by paperwork or titles. Their calm presence unsettled the board more than my words ever could. Every second of silence felt heavier, as though the walls of that hall were closing in on the HOA. But they didn't back down. They called security, tried to have me removed, even threatened legal action right there in front of everyone. Instead of showing strength, their desperation exposed just how much they had to lose. The tension was so thick, it felt like the next word, the next move, could spark something that would change everything. And in that moment, the battle lines were drawn. Just when I thought the HOA's arrogance had peaked, a second blow hit me harder than the first. After that tense meeting, I went home only to find a notice taped to my door. According to their so-called records, I was now trespassing on my own property. They claimed the sale gave them full ownership, and if I didn't leave within days, they'd bring in law enforcement to remove me. It wasn't just an insult, it was a direct challenge, a way of telling me they were willing to rewrite reality if it meant getting their way. But here's where the story twisted even deeper. A neighbor I barely knew knocked on my door that same evening. He slid a folder across my table, filled with emails and minutes from private board meetings. Inside were details about more than just my land. The HOA had been quietly moving funds, overcharging homeowners, and funneling the money into side projects. My property sale was only part of a much bigger plan. They weren't just greedy, they were covering up something that could shake the entire subdivision to its core. The stakes shot up instantly. What started as a fight for my land was now tangled with fraud, lies, and secrets that could affect every family in the neighborhood. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one they had wronged. Dozens of people were unknowingly trapped in their scheme. The very people who had stayed silent began realizing they might be next on the chopping block. The board didn't know I had this information yet, but the weight of it pressed down on me. I could expose everything, but that would mean stepping into a battle far bigger than I imagined. And as I looked at that folder, I realized the fight had only just reached its most dangerous turn. The showdown came faster than anyone expected. At the next HOA meeting, the room was overflowing. Word had spread about the shady land deal, and neighbors who once stayed silent now demanded answers. I walked in with that folder under my arm, and the board immediately stiffened. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know how deep their own trail of lies went. When it was my turn to speak, I laid it all out, how they sold my land while I was deployed, how they used fake votes to push their agenda, and finally, how they funneled money out of community funds. The room erupted with anger. Homeowners who had paid dues for years realized they had been financing the board's greed. The HOA president tried to shout me down, waving papers in the air, but the evidence was too strong. Every document, every email, every receipt painted a clear picture. Then came the unexpected twist. Just as the board tried to adjourn the meeting and walk out, uniformed officers stepped through the doors. But they weren't there for me. They had been quietly tipped off by the same neighbor who slipped me the folder, and now the board members were the ones being questioned in front of everyone. The very law they threatened me with turned against them in an instant. The crowd's silence broke into cheers. relief washing over faces that had carried frustration for years. My land was restored, the fraud was exposed, and the HOA's control shattered. But the real surprise came afterward. The neighbor who helped me wasn't just looking out for me. He revealed he was once on the board himself, forced out when he refused to play along. He'd been waiting for the right moment to bring them down, and my return had lit the spark. After the chaos of that night, the subdivision slowly began to breathe again. With the board exposed, new leadership was voted in, this time made up of neighbors who actually cared about the community. The shady projects were halted, the stolen funds were traced, and the homeowners finally had a chance to rebuild trust. My land was officially restored, and for the first time since coming home, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. The neighbor who had handed me that folder became a close friend. He admitted he had carried guilt for years, watching the board turn corrupt while he stayed silent. Helping me wasn't just about righting a wrong, it was about redeeming himself. His courage, along with the support of those who finally stood up, showed that even the strongest grip of power can crumble when people unite against it. As for me, I returned to the original plan. That land became more than just a piece of ground, it was a reminder of resilience. I cleared it up, planted new roots, and finally began building the home I had envisioned long before the HOA tried to take it away. Every nail and board felt like a victory, not just for me but for everyone who had been afraid to speak out. The biggest takeaway was simple: never underestimate the value of standing your ground. Whether it's land, family, or principle, protecting what's yours matters. The HOA thought my absence made me powerless, but they forgot the strength that comes from loyalty, integrity, and community. In the end, it wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. And as the sun set over that reclaimed land, I knew the fight had been worth every moment. The story had finally come full circle,